Hello, folks, and a very warm welcome to this evening's webinar, which is billed as a conversation between myself and João Vale de Almeida. Now, you've been notified there are some technical issues. I have to say straight away, joining me on the screen here is Mark English, who has not been an ambassador, an EU ambassador anywhere, as far as I'm aware.
Not yet, Molly, not yet.
No, we seem to be having some difficulty bringing João into the webinar. So what I'm going to do is start with the introduction. I'll be introducing him in his absence, and then we're hoping by the time I've got to the end of the introduction, he'll have joined us. And if that hasn't happened, then I would suggest we move on to questions and comments on the book, really, from people that have read it. So yeah, we're hoping that he'll join us in the next 5 minutes. So I have to say it is an absolute pleasure to have this evening with João Vale de Almeida. And it's a really interesting book. I can say that quite genuinely. And, you know, I'm sure you'd really enjoy it if you haven't had a chance to read it already. João has an extraordinary CV with experience at the highest levels dating back decades. Between 2004 and 2009, he was chef de cabinet to the President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso. And from there, he went on to head up the External Relations DG at the European Commission. Since then, he's held 3 prominent roles as ambassador to the USA, to the UN, and then to the UK. And we were very lucky to have him as the EU ambassador here during that very rocky time immediately after we left the EU. We're going to be loosely following the themes that João brings out in his book, which is called The Divorce of Nations. I have to warn you that the subtitle is even more apocalyptic than the title, and I'm not going to share it because we were hoping to focus on the rather more positive aspects. We all admit we're in a crisis, but we're hoping we can find some positive solutions and suggestions to improve things. And I'm sure after listening to João, you will want to rush off and buy his book, because while the title sounds a bit daunting, the book is anything but. It's lively and full of fascinating insights and behind-the-scenes glimpses into the real world of global diplomacy. As you can see, there's a QR code there to get hold of a copy of the book, and we have 2 links, one linking to a certain American bookseller, which I won't mention, who offer a large discount but are closely tied to the Trump administration, or the much more morally sound way of buying the book, which is via the Guardian bookshop, who offer a smaller discount but less moral retribution. So your choice, but do buy it because it's an excellent book. Now, as I said, the book is titled The Divorce of Nations, and there is an extended metaphor comparing relationships between nations to human relationships. And just reading a little bit from the introduction, divorce literature, this is a quote now, divorce literature is consistent in identifying the warning signs of trouble in personal relations, breakdowns in communication, negative feelings associated with the partner, constant financial disagreements, lack of respect, loss of happiness, loss of intimacy, loss of trust, poor conflict resolution. And I think we can all see why the parallels being drawn there, especially if we think back to Brexit, between the breakdown of relationships between countries and the breakdown of personal relationships. And João concludes that, be it politicians or anonymous citizens, we are all human beings. And actually the book gives a lot of personal insights into what it was like meeting the various world leaders who have really been the drivers of global politics over the past several decades. And I found some of the insights and João's view of the world leaders that have really been making the weather really, really interesting. So João has had a front row seat for some of the most momentous events of the past few years, and I very much hope we'll be welcoming him soon to hear his perspective from the years he spent at the heart of global diplomacy. Some of the fascinating insights about the personalities involved and his useful and valuable suggestions about what we can do to rebuild these relationships. At this point, we're going to go over to João speaking, and he's got 20 minutes for that, and I can't fill that 20 minutes. What I was going to suggest is if anybody who's on the call has read the book, maybe they could share something they enjoyed about it. I don't know if Scott can bring you in, or if you can share what you enjoyed, and maybe I could read that out to everybody else who's here. I'm very sorry he's not here, but it's obviously beyond my control.
Yeah, so if anyone does have anything they'd like to comment, we can bring that on screen just while we're waiting for João to be able to join the webinar. If you post in the chat section of the live video you're watching at the moment, we can bring that on screen at the moment. We do have a couple of questions that have already come in. Unfortunately, with João not here, we're not able to post those. But if you have read the book, or if you have any other comments, put them on there. The other thing I'd suggest is, if we're not able to get João online during the webinar, if you do have any questions for him, if you post them on there, we'll try to rearrange this at another time. And João is just actually joining us. So let's bring him on screen.
Terribly sorry for this. I thought it was at 8 o'clock Brussels time, so it must be my...
Do you know what, João? Your timing is still pretty good, because I just got to the end of filling in and introducing you and saying how fascinating the book was and how very excited we are and how much we're looking forward to hearing from you. So I can hand straight over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Molly. Sorry for this little hiccup. I mean, sometimes it has to do with the difference of time between us and you. In any case, I'm very, very happy to join you, even if a bit later than foreseen. So I want to say hello to all the friends, old friends, new friends that are joining us today. My book is a pretext only. Hello?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I lost you somehow, but I hope I'm back. Okay. Let's hope it's good. Anyway, for me, the book is a pretext for the conversation, and a renewed conversation with some of you about issues of common interest, I would say. Almost sure that is the case. And I'd like to start by outlining the main reasons why I read the book and what's in it. I'm sure Molly told you a few things about it. I would say that it is a look back into the first quarter of this century, seen from my practitioner eyes, in Brussels, Washington, New York, and London. And I tried to look at the main trends, main events, main personalities that shaped this very eventful first quarter of the 21st century. And I look at it from the angle of divorce. Actually, two divorces. One on the global stage, a divorce among nations, and the other one, the divorce within each of our nations. And that covers absolutely the United Kingdom and the countries of the European Union. And but not all. Why divorce? Because I think what we are happening or witnessing is a fragmentation, a polarization, a division. We have signs of intolerance, of people are unable to discuss, to talk, to agree. And this is basically what divorce is about among people. And I found an intriguing parallelism between the way people act and the way nations act. And I wanted to explore that track of seeing how did we come to this level of divorce? Is it inevitable? What can we do? What can you do about it? Maybe I see there's a problem with sound, so let me see what I can do myself. Is that okay? Okay.
I don't know. Do you have a microphone there, or are you just speaking at a device?
I'm speaking at the laptop. Yeah.
Oh, I can hear you okay, but it's not perfect sound quality.
I don't know what I can do.
I suggest you carry on. I'm glad you're here, and I'm interested to hear, and I can understand you perfectly well.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was saying about divorce, what brought us here? How can we go forward from where we are today against the backdrop of what happened in the last 25 years or so? I would say that overall, the 21st century is deconstructing what the 20th century had been able to put together as a system of global governance. The problem is that it is not providing, the new century is not providing a viable, feasible alternative. So we may find ourselves in a situation in which we abandon the kind of world we knew or global organization governance that we knew, and entering a new phase without a clear perspective of what we are entering. If you look at the national level, a number of consensus, uh, codes of conduct that were established being, the right way, the best way for people to interact, for governments to deal with citizens and vice versa, for governments to deal with opposition. And all that seems to be being questioned right now. And if you bring the two divorces together, you will realize very soon that they interact. They have a negative influence on the other. If you take the phenomenon of populism in our nation, which is a main element of the divorce within nations, you will see that it has an impact on foreign policy choices, on foreign alliance, on trade policy, on the way you handle your relations or the countries or the nation's relations with other countries in the world, but also the way you position yourself or your country regarding multilateralism. So there is cross pollution between the divorce at the national level, and Britain is well positioned to know what I'm talking about, and many of our countries in the European Union, as much as the United States. Can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Good. As much as the United States, there's cross pollution between that and what happens at the global level. And I think recent months have proven the influence of foreign policy issues in the domestic political debate and vice versa. Take the issue of Gaza, or take the issue, of course, of Ukraine, Russia, and Putin, or the Chinese question. So, of course, this was true in the past, but I think what this century has proven is that it is even more so right now. So I was interested to see or look into each of these divorces, but also looking at the interaction between the two. So you will find in a book, a number of chapters that try to give you a perspective of this first quarter of the century. It's not a chronological narrative, and it's not an academic narrative, as I'm sure Molly has already found out. It is a mix of memories or memoirs and analysis and observation and journalistic reporting of event situations that I witnessed front row and I wanted to share with people. And I go very soon backstage. In the book, I go very soon to backstage. And I start with a meeting we had, a very restricted meeting with Vladimir Putin in 2006. I was at the time chief of staff of the president of the Commission, José Manuel Barroso, and also his Sherpa for the G20 at the time. So I had a number of opportunities to meet Mr. Putin, I think overall around 15 times in restricted meetings G8 summits, later on G20 summits, and informal meetings between my boss and Putin. And I described with, a certain degree of detail, the meeting in 2006 in a private dacha of, not private, but the official dacha of Mr. Putin outside Moscow. And from that meeting, I think we can easily extrapolate a number of things that happened afterwards. So that is one element of backstage in the room kind of sharing that I do. Then I move on, for instance, to a very important meeting in Camp David with George W. Bush in 2008, in which we were basically trying to convince America or the United States to take a position and be more active as a reaction to the financial crisis that was about to happen, that Lehman Brothers had fallen just a month before. And you see from that meeting how important and how critical, even crucial, the transatlantic cooperation is to address, the main crisis in this world. And in this particular case, the financial crisis of 2008, 2011, 12. Into America, I go into, for instance, a number of things that happened with President Obama and how the American position in the world became less obvious, and how America became less willing to be the police of the world. It did not start with Trump. It actually started well before. And there's a chapter about American isolationism, which I put against the concept of exceptionalism. And I try to see how these two, tracks evolve in American history, in particular recent history, to try to explain where Mr. Trump comes from. And there you see in the book that my thesis is basically that America always kind of oscillates. I don't know if you say this in English, between balances between.
No, oscillates is perfect.
Oscillates is good. Okay, between isolationism and interventionism. But in fact, the driving force or the principle that at the end of the day will decide or determine which way they go is this concept of exceptionalism and how you manage exceptionalism as an American state or nation. I say a few words about China from experience basically I had with Hu Jintao, the predecessor of Xi Jinping, to try to highlight a little bit where China comes from. I go into the backstage of the pandemics and the COVID management, both in the UK and in the EU, and the interaction between the two. But I tried to, as far as the first quarter is concerned, to identify a number of key years. And I've chosen 2001, 2008, 2016, and 2022. 2001, I mean, there are some, interesting calendar coincidences or convergences, if you want. In 2001, there's only a few weeks between 9/11 and the accession of China to WTO, which in fact marked the beginning of the hyper-globalization period that we had, but also the biggest financial crisis and the biggest economic recession since the 20s of the last century, and 2008, because there is a proximity calendar-wise between the fall of Lehman Brothers and the invasion of Georgia by Russia, which was the first instance in which Mr. Putin showed that he didn't want to do things as before, and that he wanted to take a different line. 2016, for obvious reasons, you have Brexit and the first election of Mr. Trump. I say this is when populism comes to the high table of international politics. And then 22, because of the invasion of Ukraine, obviously, but also I think COVID played an important role and continues to play, by the way, in a number of issues. So different ways of looking at this 25 years from backstage kind of descriptions to understanding the calendar events better from a different angle. But I'm talking about divorce, and of course Brexit, I call it the mother of all divorces. And I think Brexit is unfortunately the best example where internal domestic factors meet external factors and have an impact on them. And the withdrawal from the European Union, which is a major international event for the UK, for the EU, for the West, and I would say for the world as well, it was basically determined by internal domestic political debates, and I would even say internal to one particular party, although the other big party is not totally exempt from responsibilities in this case. But anyway, it was clearly a case in which domestic tensions, domestic frustrations, domestic mismanagement at the political level created a major foreign policy decision and foreign policy new reality. Regarding Brexit, I described my 1,020 days of Brexit. So I arrived in London 2 days before Brexit Day, the end of January 2020. And I left mid-November 22, a couple of weeks after Rishi Sunak arrived to power in Britain. So these were the 1,000 most hectic days of my diplomatic life. But I will do it again right away if I was asked to, because it was extremely interesting, extremely challenging for a diplomat for all sorts of reasons, including our relationship with my very good old friend Boris Johnson. We can come back to that. There's a few stories in the book about that. So I described that. It's my version of my sort of existence within Brexit Britain in the first 3 years of Brexit. And then I tried to go a little bit deeper and provide my own, observations about why and how Brexit happened, and the consequences it may have for your country, for the European Union, and for the West in general. The last part of the book is about the European Union on one side, and the title is Swimming Against the Tide, and the role the EU has played in the second half of the last century, and in the first quarter of this one, as the main contribution to multilateralism at the regional level, the main contribution to cooperative solutions for common problems, as opposed to what we are seeing now, which is basically a national sovereignty, a very narrow concept of national sovereignty, and a very narrow concept of international cooperation. We can come back to that, but I try to, have people understand better how the European Union evolved, the role we play, our shortcomings, which are a number, of course, but also the contribution, very important contribution that the EU has produced and can continue to produce regarding the future of mankind. And in that, I talk about the EU's Bermuda triangles, from politics to the economics, to governance, to security, to external relations. It's a way of trying to put some order in my thoughts regarding what the EU has to do or not to do. And in all these chapters, of course, I talk about the relationship between the EU and the UK. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that as well. I kind of finish with a few ideas for what the West should do. I know the concept of West is disputable, debatable. I kind of stick to it because I think it still makes some sense. And my concept of West is, of course, liberal democracies, countries that are organized around basic values and principles, around the G7 plus. It's not a geographic group, of course. It has nothing to do with the West geographically, but it has to do with the West conceptually. And I think we are being challenged, all of us, and we need to be serious about the challenges. We need to get our act together, and that, for me, means very intense cooperation between the EU and the UK and the United States. And my point is, the United States is not Donald J. Trump. The United States is more than that, and I hope that we don't forget that, because that will be very dangerous if we kind of throw the baby with the bathwater as far as the US is concerned. This being said, there's a wider world out there, and my appeal is for the European Union and UK to not allow the vacuum that the US is creating to be filled by China or by Russia, or by India for that matter, or any other country, because I think we have both a responsibility and an opportunity to engage with the developing world in a much more sophisticated way. And I hope that Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump will not distract us too much from that. The very final words in the book were written just after Mr. Obama's election, second election in January.
Trump, you mean?
Trump, sorry, Mr. Trump's second election, and they are even more sort of pessimistic than the first part of the book, in the sense that I was seeing in January signs of things that have happened in the meantime, and I was worried then. I'm even more worried now. But I wanted to finish this introduction with the word of hope, if I may, Molly, because we should not be too depressed. If we are too depressed, we are serving our opponents' interests and facilitating their lives. Now, I think we should first be more confident about our system. By that, I mean liberal democracies. This is the best system ever invented to govern mankind. And I think we should project this more. We should be more confident about it. We should be more able to talk about it and fight back or push back those who have alternatives to it or supposed alternatives to it. But at the same time, we should display lesser arrogance in terms of the way we deal with other countries, and being less naive as well, because not everybody in this world is a nice guy. And I think we should be very clear about that, be more pragmatic, be more realist in the sense of foreign policy realism. But of course, without abandoning our values, because once we abandon our values, we weaken our case. And that's the main points I wanted to make. Molly, again, sorry for the miscommunication or confusion on my side, certainly about the timing. And I hope we can catch up and maybe give ourselves a little bit more time at the end. I don't know, but I'm totally at your disposal. And again, thanks for inviting me. Thanks to the European movement for the great work you do in Britain. We cooperated a lot during my stay there, although I had to keep, a balance in terms of engagement. You understand. Now I'm a free man, so I'm here to work with you, to help you as much as I can, and to benefit from your incredible knowledge of your country and your incredible commitment to European values and to the European Union itself. Thank you very much again for inviting me, and over to you, Molly.
Thank you for being here, and I can extend the welcome now that I extended at the beginning in your absence. So just to say how happy we are to have you here, and also I can say that we've had lots of messages saying that the sound's settled down now and improved, so that's good news as well. I want to say to people who are out there that I'm going to exercise chair's privilege in a while and ask some questions myself. But after that, there is an opportunity for you to ask questions. So please do drop them in the chat or in the comments on YouTube, and then somebody will feed them to me, and we'll feed as many as we can to João. I also wanted to say that you've been very diplomatic in your words here, but I can tell people in the webinar that there's actually quite a lot of gossip in the book, which I'm sure will help it sell. I'm not sure how diplomatic some of that is, but I was pretty sure when I read it that you'd retired before you wrote it, as indeed is the case. But yes, it's very lively and interesting, and I learned a lot actually, and some of my sort of preconceptions were confirmed as I read through. I didn't introduce myself either at the beginning. I'm Molly Scott-Cato, Vice Chair of the European Movement in the UK. And those who've been in a meeting I've chaired know that I'm also a pretty ruthless chair. But in this case, I'm going to hopefully extend by a little bit at the end. I'm glad you suggested that, because I think we might run over by 5 or 10 minutes. And if that's not possible, then Scott will send me a message to say so. But let's intend to do that so we have plenty of time for questions from people in the webinar. But before we get there, a few questions from me. Firstly, I'm an economist. Now, I'm slightly simplifying here, but your focus has been what we might broadly call foreign policy, whereas in my life, I focus very much on political economy. So I was particularly interested in what you have to say about the way inequality within and between countries may lie behind some of these movements that represent a threat to the world order. If I can just quote a bit of your book. You give us one cause of the crisis we're facing, and I'm quoting now, levels of inequality blamed on free trade and unfair sharing of wealth became intolerable for many and triggered anti-globalization sentiment. And now the polling that we've seen recently in this country about why people are choosing reform, really tally with that. And it shows that people are feeling just hard done by. They haven't got their fair share out of life. So could you maybe reflect a little bit on that point that you made yourself and suggest some changes that we could make to ease those tensions?
Excellent question, Molly, and excellent quote from my book. I think it's a good choice of a segment that sort of encapsulates one of the main points I make. But if I look back at this period, which you can extend a little bit into the last bit of the 20th century, which is maybe which is about globalization, to simplify. The way the world opened up, the way interconnectivity played a major role in flattening the world and narrowing and flattening the world. A good expression by an American journalist, Tom Friedman, who's encapsulated that in a very good book. So all this happened, and the overall result was extremely positive to begin with, and that is that we brought, as we normally say, millions of people out of poverty, particularly Chinese people, but not only. In many parts of the world, globalization allowed people to have new opportunities, new chances in life. We created, to a large extent, a global middle class that did not exist before. And that is good. It's good for those people whose level of prosperity was raised, but also for our economies that created new markets for our products, which means that it created jobs in our countries. That's fine. The problem was that the downside of this process, which was not sufficiently taken care of, was that we created new poor in some of our countries. In some part of our countries, and by that I mean the United States as much as UK, as much as France, Germany, or any other country in Europe, we left a number of people behind. And we didn't act soon enough to address those frustrations. The problem with technology and free trade is that they create a number of jobs. They also destroy a number of jobs. The problem is that the jobs they create does not necessarily happen where the jobs were destroyed. And this kind of mismatch created the rust belts of our countries. The Northeast, the north of England, the northeast of England, the rust belt in America. These people vote for Trump. Most of these people voted for Brexit. some of them are ready to vote for reform. In France, there was a transfer of voters from the Communist Party to the Front National throughout these years, meaning that the less favored people were finding or looking for new ways to express their frustrations, and populists somehow were able to captivate that. So if there is one mistake we made, all of us, in the last couple of decades, was that we overlooked the downsides of globalization. We didn't act on that. So is the solution to finish with globalization, go back to closed borders, limits foreign trade, reduce the extent of supply chains, all that? Is that the solution? Or isn't doing that throwing the baby with the bathwater? Isn't doing that maybe creating more problems that we are going to solve? The alternative should rather be, in my view, that we are very, conscious and very much aware of those downsides, that we correct some excesses of globalization, the whole issue of economic security we're talking about, but most importantly, that we address the needs and the frustrations of those people who are tempted to vote for populists. And I think we have neglected those people. We have somehow underestimated their degree of frustration, their right to be frustrated. On inequality, I would say also the following. With globalization, we in fact reduce the distance, the gap between the developed world and the developing world. But we created, as I said, boxes of new poor in the developed world, and we may have created also in some parts of the developing world. That goes without saying. What I think we need to do is to, revamp globalization in a way that suits the purpose of both developed and developing countries. It's easier said than done, that's for sure. But this is something that we need to address. But on inequality, we have less inequality globally than we had in the past. We have even less inequality than we had centuries ago in Europe. But you would agree with me that a very poor people in the countryside in the Middle Ages, they had no idea of how the Chinese imperial court lived, or the sultans in the Arab world lived, or even the king of their own countries would live. Today, every day, every second, people are aware of inequality. They follow the rich people, they follow celebrities, they follow football stars, they follow pop stars. They know how the rich and super rich live. You cannot escape inequality today. So it's not only that it is there as such, and I'm not denying that, but you add to it the extreme visibility of inequality in today's world. And that, of course, feeds those who want to explore those feelings in a negative way.
Yeah, sure. I could really dig further into that, but I won't, because I need to bring in questions. But I noticed that Ricardo has commented that, we've just got more of the same coming with AI, which I think is very insightful. Right, so I'm going to move on to probing a little bit about Putin now. As you say, you start the book there, and it's obviously, and I think you use the Ukraine war as the sort of bookend at the end. And you identify Putin's invasion of Ukraine as sort of closing the first turbulent quarter of this century. Yeah. And, it really comes across how personally distressed you are about the terrible war in our near neighborhood, as indeed I'm sure everybody on this call is. I'm sure people will be interested to hear what you can tell us about Putin from having seen him up close, because most of us only see this filtered through disinformation and TV and occasionally BBC correspondence and so on. Your suggestion is that his change over the past 2 decades is the result of a darkening of his personality. But do you think there's anything Western diplomats could have done to prevent him feeling quite so paranoid or undermining his attempts to rebuild the Russian Empire?
Well, it's a million pounds question. In the sense that I think everybody with some degree of responsibility or some interest about these issues ask these questions: could we have done better? Could we have done differently? Could we have somehow prevented what we have today? And I think this is a good debate, and I'm ready to, and actually I go into it in the book, although only superficially. But I think the first point we should make is that nothing of what we did or did not do can justify what Putin is doing. I think this should be absolutely clear, because otherwise we risk entering into an exercise of justifying massacres in Ukraine for the simple reason that Mr. Putin doesn't think Ukraine should exist. So first point should be that one. The second one is to try to understand what happened throughout this period. And you have and you have, first period until, I would say, the annexation of Crimea.
Mm-hmm.
And then a second one after the annexation of Crimea. Up to the annexation of Crimea in 2014, we had also two periods, I would say. One up to 2008, the first partial invasion of Georgia, and then between that and the annexation of Crimea. In that period, we maybe should have tried to be more clear about the fact that our purpose was not regime change in the Russian Federation, that our purpose was not to attack Russia, that NATO is, of course, a defensive alliance, the EU is not a military alliance, and that all we wanted was to respect the sovereign will of the people in these countries that wanted to join the EU and wanted to join NATO. Maybe we could have been clearer, I don't know. Maybe even if we were clear, Mr. Putin would not even want to understand that. Maybe, most likely, the second hypothesis is the right one. But, let's admit that we could have done better in that particular period to sort of prevent Mr. Putin from distancing himself or going into the, as I said, the dark side of his mind and the dark side of his country. A second period was after the annexation of Crimea. I think there we should have lost our illusions about what Mr. Putin was about to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this second moment, I think we were too naive, too weak, too fragile in our, willingness to send the right message to Mr. Putin. Of course, we expelled, the G7, the G8 expelled Russia from the group. It became the G7. There were a number of political statements, but, if we look back with hindsight, we didn't do much to tell Mr. Putin that we would not accept this kind of behavior. Let's be clear. And I'm speaking against myself as well. I had modest contribution to all this, but still, I think this is a collective responsibility. So, so in the first period, maybe not enough in terms of saying, we really want to kind of work with you. And in the meeting I described with Putin, Barroso is very clear about wanting a positive agenda, an agenda of modernization of the Russian economy, of strengthening of economic links. In fact, we were, still, and we even increased our dependency on oil and gas imports from Russia without associating that with a clear message of saying, if you continue to behave like this, the thing is over. We didn't cross that line, and I think, retrospectively, this could have been a mistake. After Crimea, we were not vocal enough to say this is not something that we can live with, and eventually this led him to conclude that he could even dare to go further and to have a frontal kind of invasion of Ukraine. This being said, I note that in my book, I think Mr. Putin himself evolved towards a darker kind of personality, which should not be a surprise, because authoritarian leaders who have no opposition, no free press, surrounded by yes men who depend on him for their economic prosperity, and I'm not saying more than this, but you know what I'm hinting at. they lose the sense of reality. They start living in a different world, and so it's not a surprise that they kind of exacerbate their worst instincts, their basic instincts, and the darker side of themselves. So in a way, I'm not surprised, but I was, as you say, very personally impacted by the invasion of Ukraine. I described the night in London, in Chelsea, where in my apartment I was, watching the news, and I even wrote a little personal letter to Mr. Putin, which I never sent to him, but you can find in the book, because it's really a bookend, as you say, as I say in the book. The bookends for me in this first quarter is 9/11 and the invasion of Ukraine. These two events really encapsulate a very eventful period in our history, which is now, of course, being prolonged with the Ukraine war and a number of things in the Middle East as well.
Okay. Yeah, really interesting to hear you talking about Putin. I actually had a constituent murdered by Putin agents because I represented Salisbury in the European Parliament, and Dawn Sturgis died as a result. And I was feeling then we need to be signalling more clearly. Anyway, isn't that totally? If you had a small role, I had a minuscule role. But yes, anyway, as you say, we all wish it had turned out differently. But who knows if anything could have been changed. Right. I'm really trespassing on the patience of people out there now, but I'm going to ask one last question on Brexit. I didn't see a question on Brexit come in, otherwise I would have substituted somebody else's question, but this is my question, and I think European movement people would be interested in hearing your answer to this. Obviously it's painful memories for us, but as the European movement, it's crucial to what we're about. Incidentally, I loved the picture of you looking out of that window on Smith Square. When I had an office in Europe House, I absolutely loved the fact that you took over that building from the Conservative Party. It made me laugh every time I went there. And it's a very nice picture of you also enjoying the joke. So, I think we're pretty much aligned with the interpretation you give in the book of how Brexit turned out, at least we in the European movement. But perhaps I can ask the most pressing question for European movement members, which is, what are our prospects of becoming members of the EU in the future? And what do you think the timescales and conditions might be?
Thank you very much. Let me say a word about Europe House, the 32 Smith Square building. History has this kind of things. Who would imagine that the first EU ambassador to the UK after Brexit would watch Brexit from the Thatcher's window, right? And would welcome Liz Truss and Michael Gove and a number of other people, conservative leaders and ministers to their own home, telling them, welcome home, welcome back. That's a lot of symbolism there. So I thought, and I tell that story in the book, even with photos, and it's quite interesting. Now on Brexit and on the future, let's focus on the future, because the past is there. It's not a very glorious one. The future is not easy to kind of try to anticipate, for a number of reasons. I think it's clear that today, even more than some years ago, that Brexit was not a good idea, that it does not serve the interests of it. That's my opinion, of course. Does not serve the interest of the UK. It certainly does not serve the interest of the European Union, and I believe it does not serve the interest of the West, in the sense that I'm speaking about the West. The current global context confirms that this was and that Brexit is a liability for all of us. The problem is that Brexit is a reality, which was determined by a democratic, decision of the British people, and that was kind of reflected in international treaties, and this is what we have today. And this is not to be underestimated. The fact that Brexit exists, the fact that there are a number of traumas that accompanied Brexit, and the fact that we have international obligations that we need to fulfill. Also that Brexit was the result of a number of red lines established by the British government, which have to a large extent been confirmed by the Labour government. So this is the backdrop in which we operate. So I think what people are trying to do on both sides of the channel is to look at this reality and see how much further, how far can we go while respecting this backdrop in bringing our countries closer together. And this is not an easy exercise because, for instance, if you are out of the single market and customs union, you are out of the single market and the customs union. It's difficult to find a halfway between the two. And if you find a halfway, the halfway has some costs. If you go for the Norwegian model, I mean, you are supposed to apply all the EU rules, but you don't have a say in the formulation of those rules, which, it's you may want to live with that or not, but that's a reality that you need to consider. If you want to cooperate more on security and defense, as we want, and we should, for obvious reasons, we still need to cater for the fact that the UK is no longer a member state of the European Union. That, for instance, it does not contribute to the budgetary means that the European Union puts at the service of a number of policies. And so there is a need for an ad hoc contribution for that effort. And when we start talking about money, things will get more difficult. I'm just giving you a few elements of how difficult it is against the backdrop that we have, that is Brexit, international treaties, red lines. The margin of maneuver exists, and I think the reset that was done recently proves that there is margin of maneuver. But, and I say that in my book very clearly, one should have no illusions about the flexibility, the elasticity of this situation today, which of course raises the question, what about rejoining? I mean, if you ask my opinion, I would like the UK to rejoin tomorrow.
Yes, we're up for that.
Yesterday. No doubts about that. I think it's in the interest of the UK. I believe it is in the interest of the European Union and the interest of the general community of democratic regimes and people that stand for the values that are common to us. This is easier said than done. And it implies that the British people is in agreement with me and is able to express that will in a democratic way. And that is not my issue. That's an issue for the British people to agree. But I talk in the book about trust. I was impacted by the absence of trust during the first 1,000 days of Brexit. The sheer absence of trust. I mean, there were no summits, there were no bilateral meetings. Our leaders
and the difficulty with actually accrediting you as an ambassador.
Yeah, but that's a
pointless rudeness of it.
Yeah, but it was. I think it was an own goal by the government, to be very frank, because it made me much more visible than I would ever be. I had conservative papers supporting me against the government. So it was, anyway, it happened, but it's a detail. But it shows the level of kind of mistrust that existed. So I'm very attached to that. I think we should restore trust, and I think we have restored trust clearly between our leaders and Keir Starmer. There's no doubt that it's 180 degrees in terms of difference with what we had in the past, and that's absolutely critical and crucial and necessary. I'm talking also about what I call a sort of longer-term trust in the choices of the country. And that, I think, impacts on the way we see Britain on the continental side. And I must be very frank with you, the resurfacing of the Brexit initiators in the political landscape in Britain is not something that would facilitate people on the continent to immediately kind of admit that there is a good chance of Britain rejoining, or that there is a good reason why Europe should, or the EU should agree to a number of, very large concessions to the UK, if we find ourselves in 2 or 3 years' time, or 4 or 5, with a reform prime minister.
Yeah.
So I'll be very frank. I couldn't have said this before because I had no freedom of expression as a diplomat. But as a friend of the UK, and trying to be very realistic, talking to people that I know to a large extent support rejoining, or at least us getting much closer together, I think there's an issue that we need to bear in mind about the longer term perspectives of our relationship. You can tell me that, if we move closer now, we maybe reduce the pressure on those who don't want to move closer. That's a point. But it takes two to tango. Let's see how we can handle that. Yeah. But again, it's not easy, and it's not my purpose to create illusions where they shouldn't be.
No, so it's important.
I'm very realistic about it. I'd say it's a long way. That's clear. It may mean, for instance, the reappointment of another Euro-friendly government in Britain, but also the prospects of this being a solid choice of the British people for the foreseeable future. This being said, Molly, just to finish on this, the UK is changing, or we all change. The EU is going to change. Certainly with this outside pressure, we will change. Maybe in the near future, there will be ways for us to getting closer together, even if it does not mean necessarily or immediately a full rejoining of as a EU member. Let's see what the future will be.
No, thank you for that. It's important that we take a realistic view. Right, I'm going to bring in some questions from the audience now. And the first one is actually focused on Venezuela, but I'd like to broaden it out a bit. So the question is, do you see US aggression towards Venezuela and its open seeking of regime change as a sign that the current international law is in freefall? And perhaps I could link that back to what you were saying earlier about the US not being Trump, and what you think the prospects are for the US sort of stabilizing and returning to the rule of law, being a country that respects the rule of law.
Yes, I lived as ambassador about 9 years in the United States, both in Washington and accredited to the UN afterwards. I lived through part of the Obama mandate and part of Trump's mandate. So I traveled around the country. I visited all the 50 states as an ambassador. I pretend to know a little bit about the US, to be very worried about the US today. But at the same time, if I look back at this first quarter, and if I see a country that one after the other elected people so different as George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald J. Trump, Joe Biden, and again Donald J. Trump, this tells you a lot about the country searching for its new role in the world, searching for, looking for the new balance domestically and globally. And that leads me to say, and I keep saying that to people who ask these kind of questions, let's not give up on the US too soon. Let's not take Trump for the United States. But at the same time, we need to consider that the United States will not return to the kind of role they played a couple of decades ago, right? Mm-hmm. So it's neither the US is lost, nor we need to regain the old US. It's something in between, and hopefully after the midterm elections next year, things will start to change. And 2 years down the road with the presidential election, things will change again. Maybe they won't, and maybe the US would confirm that they are on a sustainable track like the present one. But my point is they will never go back to where they were.
Yeah.
But we are not necessarily condemned to have the kinds of Mr. Trump representing America. Now, on the current situation, I'm worried because of the deterioration of the American democratic system. You know, in an article I wrote in the Portuguese press just before his inauguration in January, I said that Trump will mean the end of decency and the beginning of unpredictability. And one of the aspects that worries me the most, to be very frank, is what he has done to decency in politics. I think he brought it to ground zero. If you see his behavior towards his opponents, towards women, towards the judicial system in America, but also the way he acts with outside partners, and the way he manages foreign policy of the most important country in the world. All this is very disturbing and very detrimental to the West, because the message Mr. Trump is sending to the outside world is, see, if the American president behaves like this, why shouldn't I, a dictator in Africa or an aspiring dictator in Latin America or an authoritarian leader in Asia, behave the same way? And when the British government or the European Union leaders come to tell me that I will not have development aid if I don't behave in terms of national governance according to a certain number of values, I can say, but I'm just following what the president of the greatest country in the world is doing, and that the greatest democracy in the world is doing. So you see, the kind of message sent to the wider world worries me a lot as well. And going back to situation in the Caribbean, of course, I mean, if we say that a permanent member of the Security Council, and I mean Russia, is blatantly violating the Charter of the United Nations by aggressing one country and not recognizing the sovereignty of a given country, what can we say about a possible invasion of Venezuela? It's very dangerous when your actions legitimate what our opponents do.
Yeah.
And I think this is a sort of red line that we should try to avoid crossing.
Yeah, thank you. Right, last question is going back to your time at the UN. An interesting question coming here from Kylie. As former EU ambassador to the United Nations, do you believe the UN could be reformed to be more democratic at a global level, perhaps by overturning the hegemony of the permanent five? Well,
multilateralism is in, let's be very clear, in deep crisis these days, right? The United Nations system is a very complex one, a very elaborate, sophisticated one. It's the result of, things that we have built since the Second World War. And we should be very careful when we say the UN is not working, let's forget about the UN. Because then, what is the alternative? If we wanted to create the UN today, we'll not be able to do so. So before we kind of give up on the UN, we should think of the alternatives, and the alternatives are not better. But the UN system is largely based on the Security Council. And the Security Council is largely based on the role of the five permanent members. And when the five permanent members do not respect the Charter, when the five permanent members don't get along and are not able to cooperate to make the Security Council work, the whole UN system suffers. The Secretary General suffers because his power comes from the Security Council. The whole system of the UN suffers, and it is now suffering considerably from Russia action and from America's absence. And the combination of the two, and some games being played by China, make it a much less functional body today than we needed it to be. So it is today, because of the political circumstances, but also because of other challenges like climate change, this is when we needed the UN the most. And this is when we don't have the UN capable of fulfilling that role. And the problem, as the questioner has rightly identified, in order to reform the UN, you need to reform the Security Council. In order to reform the Security Council, you need the agreement of the P5. So if the 5 countries, permanent members, don't agree on the reform, it's very difficult for the reform to happen. But if I'm asked whether or not the UN needs to be reformed, my answer is yes, it needs to be reformed. It no longer reflects the world today. It reflects the world of the winners of the war, of the Second World War.
Yeah.
It needs to be reformed. The IMF needs to be reformed. The World Bank needs to be reformed. All these organizations need that. But for that to happen, we need a consensus. We need a political will from the different partners to engage in that process. I don't see it happening right now, but I do see the need for it to be reformed, to be more democratic, to be more representative of the world as it is today. Because otherwise, and I go back to the title of my book, The Divorce of Nations, otherwise there will be an increased divorce, there will be an increased decoupling. You may have spheres of influence. I see now that you have the QR code to buy my book, which is a good idea. I fully recommend.
Don't worry, I recommended it too. Independent view.
I'm just joking. No, my point being, if we don't sort of engage, all of us, in trying to sort of reform global governance, we may find ourselves in a very deep divorce. You will have spheres of influence, the America, Western Hemisphere, and the issues around Venezuela may have something to do with that. You will have Russia with an Eurasian kind of region that they will pretend to control, and then you will have China somewhere else. And the spheres of influence, the law of the power, the power of those who have power, is not something good for the UK and for the European Union. We cannot survive as an island, all of us. I mean, UK and the EU, because I still consider that we are together with Norway and a number of other countries around us. We cannot survive as an island of multilateralism in an ocean of nationalism and authoritarianism and protectionism, and you name it. And so it's about our survival, and that's why it is so important that we discuss these kind of issues. And I only hope that my book can contribute modestly to this kind of discussion, and that our leaders are made fully aware of the wish of citizens like all of us for them to assume their responsibilities in this.
Thank you so much. And it's time to wrap up now. But I must say, what I've enjoyed so much about this conversation is, your thoughtful responses. And we've hardly mentioned Trump and Johnson and their ridiculous personalities at all, which has been.
We didn't mention Boris at all, or hardly, no.
Good. But he is in the book if people are wanting to find out more behind the scenes views, which actually was quite interesting. But I'm glad we didn't spend our time on that here, because, so much journalistic chat is just personality nonsense in my view. And you get much more interesting insights from podcasts than you do from journalists these days. And your insights were really valuable. So thank you so much. I don't know if you're looking for a new career as some sort of global marriage guidance counselor, but I'm sure that many doors would be open if that was your choice.
Well, I'm busy with my marriage to avoid divorce.
Very, very good. Very good. We're living in rocky times. Nobody doubts that. And I think what your book underlines is that in those rocky times, relationships really matter. Personal relationships of trust are so important. I'm really pleased to see the EU is working hard to counter disinformation, because that seems to me crucial to an awful lot of what we've been talking about in terms of reasons for the crisis. And I think the other thing I would underline is the importance of countering the rise of nationalism, which we have to do in our own country. And if I can leave with a little tip to people here, what I'm suggesting people do is, because we're very British, and when we have those conversations at Christmas time and somebody says something nasty about immigration or that they're thinking of voting for reform, we'll all look down at our roast potatoes and decide not to say anything. Don't do that. Find a way to challenge those nasty narratives that are being spread, is my cheerful Christmas advice. But mostly I just wanted to say thank you so much for being with us. It's really been a pleasure. The book is terrific. We've shared the link plenty of times, and yeah, buy it. If you buy it yourself and read it, and buy it for somebody for Christmas would be my advice. Thank you very much.
Let me say how much I enjoyed this conversation. How much I didn't see all of you on screen, but I know you are there, and some of you are very good friends. And if ever you think that I can be useful anywhere in your country to stimulate the conversation, I'm, just Eurostar 2 hours and I'm in London, so I'm more than happy to come. And I wish you the best. I wish the best to European Movement UK. And I want to thank particularly Mark English was behind this in contacting me over here as a former colleague and a great guy. Thank you, Molly, for such a great moderation.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll be taking you up on that. Thank you very much. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.